Good morning and welcome to Unpublic. Excuse me, it's been a few days. I haven't been here this week, but it is so good to be back with you all this morning. This is our morning brunch where we get to talk about education, get to talk about the options and the opportunities that we provide to our young people to help them succeed in life. And we call it Unpublic specifically because we want it to be somewhat off the record, not the normal conversation that we would have about schooling or conflating education with schools, but to talk about all of the possibilities, sometimes what I call the achievement gospels. What's the good news? What are the things that are going right for our kids that we can learn from and build on and help them do better? Today, I want to talk about remote learning because it's something that just for the past year and a half or more, we actually were engaged in for the first time in mass. And everybody had to be thinking about it in a way that we had never thought about it before. Maybe if you had, prior to the pandemic, had you been one of those parents that did virtual learning or some sort of like virtual charter school or statewide virtual schools that they have, this was second nature to you. You already knew what it was and what it wasn't and whether or not it was right for your kids. But as parents, we were just all thrust into it for those of us that had kids in regular traditional schools, and we had a variety of experiences with it, depending on who our provider was, whether it was the district, and what our kids were like. In my own household, I have 3 kids that did it for a year, and man, it was not the best, most optimal thing for us, and a lot of that had to do with how it was delivered, through the district and how prepared they were. Today, I have an expert with me on the issue to help us talk through not just what we just did, but looking forward. I think there's this idea that we're all going to just go back to normal and all schools are just going to open up and it's going to almost be like they weren't interrupted for a period of time, and that families are going to go back to being in the same arrangements that they were before. But where that falls down is there's a great number of parents, for instance, that aren't going just back to life the way that it was before. Their family arrangements have changed. In some cases, their work arrangements have changed. Their lives have changed. They learned a few things over the last year and a half or whatnot. So the idea that we're just going to turn back the clock and we're going to be right back to where we were again, maybe not so smart. I'm going to bring in my expert today, Dr. Theresa Rouse. And Theresa, Dr. Rouse, let me know if I am saying your last name wrong, because this is what I'm infamous for.
It is Rouse, not Rouse.
Rouse. So Dr. Theresa Rouse.
Thank you.
And I am not going to butcher people's names. Anyways, Dr. Rouse is the superintendent of Joliet Public Schools District 86 in Illinois. That district serves more than 10,000 students, and 91% are students of color. Mm-hmm. So this is a good test case because oftentimes when we talk about things like remote learning or big educational issues, we talk about them in the universal, but we don't talk about them how they affect oftentimes like not middle class families or not just white families, but everybody else. So Dr. Rouse, good morning. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. And just a further clarification on our demographics, not only are we 91% students of color, we're about 95% economically disadvantaged. So we actually serve free breakfast and lunch to all students in our district.
Did you say 95%?
95%.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're a highly impacted multi-generational home setting in an urban setting, and so very much of need. And so this has been a true trial by fire this last year in looking at what our students needed.
So when you think about that and you think about remote learning, I think part of the popular narrative is that kids of color and kids in poverty were the most hurt by not having in-person learning. So it's novel, or it's a little interesting that you would have a different opinion, for instance, about remote learning. Why would you have a different opinion about remote learning for your student population?
Well, I've actually heard from a lot of our families that they actually want to continue in remote learning this next year because their child did very well in adapting to the online environment. Remote learning doesn't work well for everyone, and I understand that. And so it's not a perfect environment, but it should be an option for those who it does work well for. Our students had some very unique struggles here in Joliet. Not everybody has high-speed internet. So, we put out a lot of hotspots. But some of the hotspots were challenging because there's not even a strong cell phone signal in parts of the community. So, and families that had more than one or two children needed more than one hotspot. It was a long journey this last year, but the realities of, we hear a lot in national media how remote learning is horrible. Well, it's not good for everybody, but it is good for some, and throwing the baby out with the bathwater is not the way to approach this coming school year. Not everybody's ready to be back in school. We don't have vaccines for every child. We don't have mandatory vaccines. We don't even have guidance from our state yet in regards to mitigations that we need to have in place for the coming school year. So we have to have options. Our teachers did an incredible job this last year, and teaching remotely is not good for all teachers either. But some of them really excelled in that environment. And I'm looking forward to we're putting together now this summer, what are our options for this coming year so that our families have choice, so that our staff have some choice as well in regards to which environment they prefer to work within.
So you did hear from families that said for some that it was working out well. And I think you mentioned a couple of things there, though. But what was the real drive between the aha for them where they thought this actually could work for us? Why is it a good fit for some families to have this as an option?
Well, some students have, there's such thing as social anxiety disorder. And sometimes that learning in that online environment is going to be far better for those students than being in a classroom where their social anxiety becomes more pronounced than their learning. So we have to really think about individuals when we think about options for education, as opposed to one size fits all. Because
I love that. We've
done one size fits all forever, and we have an achievement gap. We have equity gaps. We have all kinds of gaps. So in my opinion, we have to stop the one size fits all and look at the individual student and what do they need? And now how do we respond to that need in order to help them to find achievement that works for them?
You mentioned anxiety, which is something I know a little bit about on my end. So having one student in my household, that was exactly the situation. You could see the difference in how you participate if you're not, in the middle of a very kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but stimulation-rich environment when it comes to everybody around you or whatever.
Exactly.
There's also things around bullying and personal safety that I think actually some parents may have learned during this time. You mentioned the teachers. So one thing I did notice was this isn't everybody's teaching style. Remote learning wasn't for every teacher. How did you work around how did you work around that? How did you actually plan for staff to be able to transition to remote learning?
Well, last summer we found an exceptional training that was specifically designed for teachers in elementary and junior high settings who hadn't been trained on how to teach online. And it really looked at how to build relationship and rapport with students, how to help navigate within that online environment to be on the best side of what students needed. We provided professional development and coaching and support all year for our teachers to help them with navigating the online environment. We actually stayed fully remote technically for the entire year. We tried to bring families in starting in February and March, and found that many of our families were not ready. Even for mandated state testing, we only had about 30% of our students who were supposed to take the test actually come in to take the test because they weren't ready to be in a school building at this time. So providing the teachers the tools and resources they need. We often talk about a toolbox for teachers. When it comes to remote learning, you're talking about a tool belt, because they need to be able to have it right on there with them and pull out whichever tool they need to be able to move things forward. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to ask, when you were in the middle of planning all of that and having to do this transition, did you find any real gurus? Did you find anybody who were like, these are the ninjas at doing this type of work? They can come in and help us and help my staff understand how to do remote learning?
Well, we're a member of a digital learning collaborative which is a national organization. And that's the group that put together the training that my teachers actually went through. And there's tons of gurus within that setting, and some of them come from other organizations. And what I have found, as far as gurus, the best gurus are those who are doing the work. And so collaborating with other school districts, collaborating with other entities who are doing this work is the best way to go forward. And we can help them, they can help us.
What do you think about efforts at the state level to say, listen, we really do just have to get everybody back in person. So the only way to really make it happen is to ban remote learning?
That's a problem, in my opinion. I think we have to. Why would we go backwards in education when we've experienced a new horizon, and we can go forward using some of the good parts of remote learning, and really provide solid options for our students? People talk about wanting to get back to normal. Well, normal is a setting on the clothes dryer. I don't want to push that button.
Ooh, that's very good.
I don't want to just push that button. I don't want to go back to industrialized education that we've had before. I think we need to use this last year, the pandemic, as a lever for change, and really look at how education needs to look different and feel different and be different for students and staff.
As a superintendent, do you have enough? Do you have enough resources and enough of just everything that you need to be able to deliver different options to different groups of families? Are you constrained?
Well, the stimulus money has been helpful during the pandemic, and the money that's here helping us move forward. But that money dries up after a few years. And so we have to be very strategic in how we use that, because I can't go out and hire a bunch of new staff, because when the money dries up, how am I going to pay them? There's not an ongoing source of money. So we have to, again, be strategic and creative in how we look at the funds that we have, so that we're purchasing and using those funds for things that will sustain us long term. We're looking at using some of those funds to really dig into our HVAC systems and look at our air quality in our buildings in a different way, so that we can ensure that peace of mind when you walk into a building. We've already got HEPA filtration systems in all of our offices and classrooms, but looking at continuing that facility upgrade piece. But we're also looking at using some of that money in a way that will help, I think, extend us beyond the money. And that is by possibly putting in some CBRS towers. And those would allow us to extend our network out to our students' homes without having to use hotspots, without having to use those things that depend on a cellular signal. So if we can strategically plan and place some CBRS towers on our properties and extend our network out in those areas, especially where there's not strong cell phone signals, or where the highest need is within our district, we can more long term help to address the need for internet access. The fact that we don't have ubiquitous broadband internet in this country it's ridiculous, in my opinion.
Totally ridiculous.
And there's so many aspects of that need to be addressed at the federal level. And people are trying, but there's still plenty of roadblocks along the way. But if we can use our money strategically to build some of those towers, maintaining those towers, we can manage within our normal budget.
Yeah, it's a good place for me to interject. My organization, brightbeamnetwork.org. People should go check it out. We have done work around internet for all, and are continuing to push on that. You can also go to voicetoaction.org, and we have done national petitions around that. In your role as a superintendent, when you think about things like that, why aren't we fully wired yet in 2021? As a Gen X parent, we were supposed to have flying cars by now. But we are not even wired up. I thought that was such an archaic, primitive problem to have when we went into this. And, I'm leading to a point here, I know some schools and some school districts, the cell providers actually wanted to put cell towers in school buildings on school properties. And the payoff in some cities was going to be, if you did that, they would give, like Minneapolis had free internet for a while as a city. like the whole city was wired. I think San Francisco and some other places were too. But here's the point that I'm driving to. Long way of getting there. As a superintendent, you have to provide for kids. But when you look around you at other members of the political class, mayors and county officials and statewide and legislators or whatnot, I mean, what would be your message to them to get their act together in terms of creating a portfolio of family supporting policies and resources?
Well, my message has been continued. So I'm starting my 6th school year here in Joliet. And my message continually since I've been here is that we have to work together. If we continue working separately as entities within any setting, we only can go so far. My school district stops at 8th grade, and my students then go to the Township High School District, which is located here in Joliet as well. So we work tightly and very closely with that high school district in supporting our students and the families as they move forward. What we need as far as the city government and county government would be for folks to come together, put the egos and political agendas on the side, and really look at what do our families need, what do our communities need, in order for everyone, for all boats to rise, not just some boats to rise in moving forward.
I think that ability to be able to put political agendas aside and say children are in all of our jurisdiction, like we are all responsible. The reason I ask you that question specifically, though, is because oftentimes we point to education leaders as like they're living on an island by themselves and they're solely responsible. And we're like, no. All of us that are either appointed or elected or in some position of leadership, the children are in our jurisdiction together, like the entire political class. But oftentimes it's, the superintendents, the principals, the teachers, where it's kind of like, that's those guys' thing, Right.
Well, and that's why within this community, I've really made a concerted effort. I actually, during my first year, visited every single church that would invite me in. I spoke from their pulpit to their congregation on a Sunday during a service about the school district, about my vision for the school district, about how we can work together to move things forward, because everybody's got kids, grandkids, nieces, nephews. So everybody knows children. So in trying to get that support, even through the church organizations, has really been profound here in Joliet. And I bring the clergy together. We have a luncheon once a year to really look at, and I don't care what denomination you are, we're coming together because we're going to talk, because we've all got children in our lives. So let's work together. The hard part's been breaching the city government, county government side. They'll listen, but as far as really looking at attaching dollars and cents or other resources to initiatives is an interesting one. But we're going to keep beating on that door.
Yeah. Well, listen, I'll say this so much. This is just me being me, and this is not you saying this, but I was just in Atlanta with a meeting of activists and parents. And it's something that comes to me from time to time that I said in the middle of our talk. And I said, if you looked at all the sum total of child laws in the United States, child supporting policies in the United States, this is going to be a harsh thing I'm going to say, but you would have to come to the conclusion that America doesn't love its young. America doesn't love its young people, because if it did, there would be no way to explain the policies that we have that govern the lives of young people. So when we talk about something like internet for all, or arguments whether or not we should keep families economically secure during this very rough time, those conversations descend into some very nasty, political, divisive, ideological debates that wouldn't happen in a civilization that loved children. Like it just wouldn't happen.
You're actually quite correct on that. It's there's a lot of things we have to really look at in this country, not only just about children, but about race, about equity, about so many things that we need to upright within our system, and to be able to do that, though, we need everybody to look inside themselves and figure out their internal issues, their internal biases, so that we can then address the biases that exist in all aspects of our lives.
I mean, and now you're calling for a reflection that people don't want to do. Don't put me on the spot. Don't me think about myself. I have a question to you about parents, because I just mentioned parents. And I think one of my main focuses always is, what are we doing to help equip parents to do their best job as supporters of their children's best interests? So in this case, what did you learn about remote learning in terms of supporting parents' ability to be able to do their best job at home? This was new for a lot of parents, and not everybody, was super organized and had time to figure this out. What did you learn in trying to work with parents and families about supporting their kids in remote learning?
What we learned is that you have to have multiple streams of ways to equip those parents. We had a guidebook that we put out in English and Spanish. We not only put it out in print, we did short snippet videos to go along with each section to really be able to expound upon the sections. We provided opportunities for parents they had technical support available to them 24/7. They could submit help tickets, and we had technicians that would respond and provide that support to them along the way. Some of our families, our children ended up in somewhat sheltered childcare settings during the pandemic because the parents had to go to work. So we worked directly with those childcare settings and providing them the support they needed. My principals would show up at somebody's door. They would help them from outside the door. They would give them that support. A lot of on the porch one-on-ones with families that needed that support, as well as showing up at some of the childcare settings and helping with some discipline concerns and working with and providing resources for children. One child was having a really hard time and he didn't have any kind of headphones, and so there was too much distraction around him. The principal went out and bought some noise canceling headphones for him that allowed him to be able to hear what was on his computer and nothing else in the room, and he all of a sudden started achieving. So it's about being resourceful and flexible. Flexi bendy Barbie is our motto here. It's like, how much can we bend over backwards to provide for our families, for our parents? And we've done a lot of parent training. We do a lot of outreach into the preschools in Joliet. We have relationships with preschools. I don't care where their children end up going to school. If they're a preschool in Joliet, we help provide support to them on some of the basic fundamentals that they could start working on with the children so that they're better ready for kindergarten.
Did you have any mental health concerns with students?
And staff, yes.
And staff. Really? I wouldn't think about that. Okay, so tell me more about both.
Yeah, the pandemic was hard on everybody. The trauma of the pandemic and the trapped at home and the feelings of isolation and all kinds of things. The realities of the mental health side of things was pretty profound. Several of our teachers, students would make a comment in the chat or they would notice something in their video. They would we have social workers that work with every one of our school buildings. Social worker would log into the Zoom session, invite the student into a private session so they could talk, providing all kinds of one-on-ones with students, small groups with students, reaching out to the families when there were issues that looked like there was something in the home that might be not a successful environment for the child. Working with them, working with social agencies as well. We have several partners in Joliet that we work with to help provide counseling for our families as well as our students. Our staff, we worked on providing social emotional supports for them all year. There was one session, one time we had a day where the kids were off, but all the staff were in for professional development. And we began that day with a virtual relaxation session. We had a lady who does virtual yoga sessions from somewhere in the mountains of Virginia. She joined us virtually and led us through a breathing exercise. And everybody in the entire organization, all 1,700 employees, we were all online watching at the same time, participating. We recorded that and then made that available for staff to go back and revisit it so that they could, it's like, you got to remember to breathe. You got to remember it's okay to stop and just breathe for a few minutes. Because my staff, my teachers, they were teaching from home for a good chunk of the year, but they've also got their kids at home with them who are in classes. So they're they're juggling all kinds of things, and then when we tried to bring students back into the building, then what do you do with the ones that are in the building versus the ones that are still remote? and juggling that notion of simultaneous teaching, which is not a successful strategy, in my opinion. So there are a lot of things that we had to consider as we rolled forward in helping our staff not go off the edge as well. So support all along, social workers, counselors, all those pieces really make a difference.
It sounds like it sounds to me like a little bit too, like this is all year one stuff that we're having to figure out in remote learning. But if you did it for another year and then another year and another year, it's not like it would stay static as a challenge, right?
Well, there'd be different challenges. We would all learn. Yeah. We'd learn from what were the challenges the first year and make those modifications moving forward. It's like, I remember the first year I was a classroom teacher. I don't ever want to have that year again. And I'm sure everybody looks back at this year going, I don't want to ever have that year again.
Me, as a parent, I do not want to relive this year.
Exactly. Yeah. But we learned something from it, and there will be some things that will continue into the future.
That makes me think, just as a parent, I keep mentioning this, that didn't have a great year with it or whatnot. There's a way for me to make it static and think, don't want to do remote learning again and, whatever. But the truth of the matter is a lot of what I don't like about it is first year stuff. So, the district didn't have time. I mean, the district was really, I think when we first shut down here, the district had like an emergency 2-week thing where they were like, listen, guys, we are just going to shut everything down for 2 weeks and we'll get back to you. And, it's just like, keep your kids at home for now. Don't freak out, but kind of freak out anyways. Right. But after that 2 weeks, they came back online with a digital academy for parents that wanted it and needed it. And you could just tell it was a lot of hiccups. It was a lot of bumps in the road, but those would get smoothed out.
Picture not being one-on-one at that point. We weren't a one-on-one environment at that point. Our students didn't all have computers at home. So we killed a whole bunch of trees.
Yeah.
When we first had to shut down.
Because you were printing stuff.
We were printing all kinds of things. They had to get a packet every week.
Yeah.
And then you bring the packets back in and you got to let them sit so there's no germs on them, so somebody can touch them and not feel unsafe. I mean, it was crazy.
Yeah.
But then, you develop the one-to-one thing. But the realities of that first year piece, I want to kind of go back to that just for a second, Christopher. The idea of what we all heard in the media during this last year was remote learning is bad and learning loss. Well, I'm here to say nobody lost anything this last year. We all survived a pandemic. And we have unfinished learning that we need to attend to as we begin this next school year. And my whole goal here is to try to get us off the notion of deficit thinking about our children and really looking at what did they learn this last year? Because they learned some things other than academics this last year that we can capitalize upon to help move them forward.
I think this is an aside to the remote learning piece of this. Some of the major lessons, just I think as a parent, that our kids learned this year is how unsafe and unstable the natural order of things can be. We don't pay attention to the fact that their whole lives had been one way, and on a dime, everything shifted. And to adults, that's discombobulating. I don't like that word. I just use it from time to time. But, but to kids, that's really like a first time in their life. Wait a second. You mean everything you told me as the natural order can change on a dime, like overnight? And that's going to be something we're going to have to live with for a while now, I think, with establishing safety for kids and safe routines for them moving forward. Were there any tools that came out of remote learning that you had to discover or had to rely on where you thought, like thinking in terms of assets, like, like positive thinking, like, oh, wow, we would have never discovered these tools or these ways of doing things had we not went into remote learning? And I'm only asking because, as parents, we were inundated with tools we had never heard of before, right. Like 4 or 5 of them.
Right. Well, we have a lot of digital tools already in our repertoire here in the district. But, I actually think, and some people may just groan over this, but the use of Zoom for meetings and for efficiency of meetings will be something we will use in the future. Now, I don't want to have kids sit in Zoom 5-6 hours a day. We have to change that paradigm and get out of Zoom for some asynchronous learning when we're in this online world. But the realities of the tool that Zoom provides for us, we actually can be much more efficient and effective when we have meetings that are across the district, or in across the state or across the nation. There's been a lot of different groups that I belong to. We couldn't meet physically, but we've been meeting electronically and virtually through Zoom, and have been quite productive and successful in that movement forward. So that actually, as much as it has been the bane of our existence this last year, actually will be something that we'll continue to use in those types of formats.
You hit on something else that made me think. Well, first of all, I'm going to agree with you and say yes. The moment that I hear Zoom, I groan. It's like a big groan too. It's not even a small groan. It's just like a huge, like, oh my God, don't make me do this anymore. But I did want to ask you about discipline. You have a district where you said at the outset, I did not know. So it's 91% of color, 95% economically disadvantaged. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So discipline on things like Zoom and in remote learning, did that become an issue for you? Where did you stand on things like cameras on and cameras off? And we've seen, some horror stories in the news around suspensions, like people being suspended for things that happened on Zoom. How'd you experience that?
We did have a few situations that were challenging based upon what you could see in the camera, or what a child actually had in their hands while they're in class. There were some different things where we had to, send somebody over to the house, talk with the parents, work with the child, and and manage some pieces. I don't know that we actually suspended anyone. Because what are you suspending them from? They're at home already.
That's true.
But discipline, there's still discipline in an online environment. There's always the special nature of Zoom bombing and people showing up sometimes that shouldn't be there, and teachers needing to change up their Zoom links frequently enough to keep that down. So there's always different little pieces that will play out as we roll forward. But the discipline was, the principal could pop in and have a student come into a private room and have a conversation and typically solve the problem and, move them back out. I see in the chat, somebody mentions a cops being called on a family because of a toy gun. The realities are, if there's a toy gun at school would also have created the same scenario, unfortunately. The challenges of weapons, being seen. Sometimes there's students who think it's okay to vape during class if they're at home. Well, not so much. So, but they're in their own home. But as far as having cameras on or off, our preference was to have them on, but we also recognize the fact that sometimes for a student, it was better for them to have it off because what we were able to see in their home was kind of not okay. And they didn't want to be embarrassed in front of the other students in the class
about their surroundings in the background. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that having that grace with them, to where it's not an all or nothing. Because life is not about all or nothings. It really is about the grace that we can give others to help them succeed.
Yeah, I think I don't know how you solve for some of these things moving forward in terms of remote learning. What you just mentioned, I think very much is a class issue. Some students, didn't want to show you all of what's going on in their rooms and in their lives. Some of them didn't have a quiet space to be in. Some of them, if you have multiple kids and you're in an apartment, for instance, there's not a place for all of your individual kids to be necessarily where it's going to be quiet and they can just be focused. I like what you said at the beginning of this conversation, though. We have to stop thinking about universal or the average kid or everybody and start thinking about each kid and each person, because what's good for one could be terrible for another. And you can't create a system that just tries to split the difference. Oh, let's just, make an average then kid as our persona. Right. And forget about the needs. There's one group I did want to ask about, last before we leave for sure. How did you handle special education during this time with remote learning?
that was the unique challenge of everything that we do. The students with the most extreme needs, we tried bringing them in to the building, but the community spread here in Joliet was so pronounced that we had to have folks at home. Our occupational therapists, physical therapists, they did activities via Zoom with the family. Some of them would go to the home and do activities from the front porch. So the teacher in the yard, the student out on the front porch, having some of their therapy sessions. The special education staff really rose to the occasion and tried to meet those needs. The hardest group we had in working with remote learning was our students who are visually impaired, because it's a little tough to manage a Zoom setting if you're visually impaired. And so those students, we attempted to have them in as often as possible so that they could have that opportunity in class with their Braille books, with their, different things, so that they could find that success. And special education was the first group that we started bringing back in February in small group settings, 1 or 2 days a week, trying to bring people back in. But only about 30 to 40% of the families said that they would come in. They understood that it was still a challenge at home with special education, but they just felt safer at home at that point still.
Yeah, I actually appreciate the complexity of leading these systems. And I shouldn't say I understand it like I have done it. I understand it there are some roles in American life that have no easy answers. Everything is a conundrum and a balancing act and a trade-off. Yeah. So I see you as a person who's got to master that. That's your life.
It's been interesting this last year. It's been like, and it's every year for a superintendent can be that way. But this last year was like 5 years rolled into one, and at one point I told my school board, I said, I feel a little bit like a piñata, but no candy has fallen out. And every weekend is all about shoring up the sides. So I'm ready for the next round, because you can't please everybody with answers during a time like this. And so there's always someone going to be upset. And it's about listening to them, hearing them, and making adjustments as possible to try to better meet more needs. But it's tough to make everybody happy.
Well, I appreciate there's people like you that step up to do it. Honestly, we're not all cut for it. We're not built for it. Leadership in situations where there are no easy answers is not for everybody. So I'll just put that out there. I think we're going into a time where this might get just even more additionally burdensome to lead in these times, because communities are atomizing. They're finding like they're reveling in their political differences and how much they can come and stick it to the board and stick it to the district. And we're seeing a national conversation around curriculum and how we teach history and, CRT and all these things. And that to me almost looks like it's stoking division on purpose where there doesn't need to be any. And if that's where we're going, I don't know how many superintendents are going to want to lead in the situation where your every day is being yelled at.
Right. Well, this last year, they're estimating that we're losing close to 30% of superintendents that are deciding to retire or leave their profession. It was a tough year in a lot of ways. So it's a challenge nationally. And I got to tell you, there were some days where I wanted to come in, take my keys, and just drop them and walk out. And it's
be done.
But I know well enough that during the middle of a crisis, it's not the time for that kind of a decision. So we've made it through so far, and we're going to keep moving forward.
Well, I noticed, and I want to point people to, we got a wrap here, and I know you have to move on to some important meetings that you have today. But I did, before we go, want to share with people that you had written this article for Ed Week that I wanted to share and make sure that everybody, let me see if I can find it now. There we go. Adding to the stream. There we go. Why are we turning our backs on remote learning? The current debate over remote learning feels politically charged. This was June 17th in Ed Week, just so for everybody, if you want to go check out the article. But, as we end, what was your hope? What was your thesis here? What was your main point that you hoped people would understand when they read this?
My main point would be that options for students are what's best. And we can change what wasn't working well about remote learning, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's fix it, make it better, and keep options available for all students. We can't go backwards. We can't go backwards. It's not time to go back to 1980 when we didn't have the internet.
Yeah. or 2019 where
Exactly.
we weren't prepared with internet
Exactly.
for everybody. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
it's really important, I think, that we not go backwards, that we take this, fix it, and continue to move forward.
It's a great message. Thank you so much for coming on this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a blast. I appreciate
love
that.
it.
Somebody in the chat's asking for the link to the article, if that
I
helps.
will drop the link in the article for the fam, for our brunch fam watching and listening today, and please share it around everybody. Let's keep the conversation going. I love this this message about going backwards is not an option. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
Like nobody ever does that if you care about like progress. So going forward, this has been Dr. Theresa Rouse.
Thank you.
I got it. Superintendent of the Joliet Public Schools District 86 in Illinois. It is a 91% free and reduced lunch, 95%, and 90% kids of color. This was a good case study in how you lead through a very rough time. While everybody in the world is talking about the average kid or the middle class kids and what middle class families are doing, you have entire districts that have a different challenge. So for me, frankly, it's a pretty novel message to hear from a district like that remote learning isn't all the bad stuff that we heard it is. For some, it could be a good option. So we should respect that. Thank you all for listening and watching. We will be back again tomorrow with our Freedom Friday edition of Unpublic. And as always, we appreciate